Taking a deep dive into something pretty wild, the potential dangers of nanotechnology.
Oh, this is going to be good.
Yeah, we're going pretty deep down the rabbit hole on this one. We'll be exploring how it ties into the Blue Beam Project, and more importantly, how we might be able to protect ourselves.
I'm all ears.
The source for all of this is a presentation by Tony Pantalleresco. He's a researcher, and he did this whole thing on the Micro Effect Broadcasting Network. Now, I'm going to be up front. Some of what we're going to talk about is definitely out there.
Fringe territory for sure.
Exactly. But I think it's important to explore these ideas, even if they seem a little strange at first. You know, it's all about keeping an open mind and coming to your own conclusions.
Couldn't agree more.
So, get ready for some mind-bending stuff.
Yeah.
We're talking about the possibility of blue light actually activating nanotechnology inside our bodies. And then there's this whole Blue Beam Project, which Pantalleresco thinks is about projecting images directly into our minds using nanotech.
Hold on, projecting images into our minds. How's that even possible?
Well, that's what we're going to dig into. And on top of all that, we'll even touch on some everyday items that might help protect against this kind of tech.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. Where do we even start with all this?
Let's start with Pantalleresco himself. He's not afraid to make some pretty bold claims. Like, for starters, he says that nanotechnology is everywhere. I mean, everywhere in the skies, our food, even already inside us.
Wow, that's a big statement. Is there any evidence to back that up?
Well, that's the thing with a lot of this stuff. It's hard to say for sure. But Pantalleresco makes a pretty compelling case.
I'm curious to hear more.
He doesn't stop there, though. He also argues that this nanotech hasn't been properly tested and could be seriously dangerous to human health.
Dangerous how?
Well, he believes it could mess with our genetic code, and not just ours, but the genetic code of all living things.
Okay, that's a little scary. Is he talking about some kind of global catastrophe?
He doesn't necessarily go that far, but he uses a pretty vivid analogy to describe what he thinks is happening. Imagine a glass of water. You keep filling it up, and eventually it overflows, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
That's how he sees nanotechnology building up in our bodies. It's like we're reaching a saturation point, and our bodies just can't get rid of it fast enough. He thinks that's when the real problems start.
That's a pretty disturbing image, so what can we do about it?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. This brings us to the Blue Beam Project. Now, you've probably heard of that before, right?
Yeah, isn't that the conspiracy theory about giant holograms in the sky?
Exactly. But Pantalleresco has a slightly different take on it. He thinks it's not about these big, flashy projections, but something much more insidious. He believes it's about using targeted blue light to activate the nanotechnology that's already inside our brains.
Whoa. Back up a second. How could blue light possibly activate nanotechnology in our brains?
Okay, so according to Pantalleresco, certain nanomaterials, maybe we breathe them in, eat them, who knows, could actually assemble in specific parts of our brains. And once they're there, they become susceptible to control from specific frequencies of blue light.
So like some kind of remote control for our brains.
In a way, yeah. It's like they become little antennas tuned to pick up signals from this blue light. And those signals could, theoretically, influence our thoughts and behaviors.
So are you saying I should ditch my fancy new LED light bulbs?
Well, Pantalleresco does suggest sticking with traditional incandescent bulbs because they emit more yellow light. He seems to think yellow light might actually neutralize the effects of blue light on this nanotech.
Really? So the old school bulbs might actually be better for us?
Maybe. It definitely makes you think twice about all the blue light we're exposed to these days, from screens to LED lights. It's like we're adopting all this new technology without really considering the potential consequences.
It's like we're all in this giant experiment and we didn't even sign up for it.
Exactly. And it makes me think of that movie, They Live. Have you ever seen it?
Can't say I have.
Well, there's this scene where the main character puts on these special sunglasses, and suddenly he can see all these subliminal messages hidden in everyday things like billboards and magazines.
Oh, I think I've heard of that. So is Pantalleresco saying blue light is like those sunglasses, revealing something hidden?
Sort of. But it's even creepier than that. It's not just about seeing hidden messages, it's about the possibility that this blue light could actually be influencing our thoughts and actions without us even realizing it.
Wow, that's pretty unsettling.
Right, and it's not just external sources of blue light we have to worry about. Pantalleresco also brings up this popular supplement called C60. A lot of people are taking it for health benefits, but he's found reports of some pretty nasty side effects.
Really? I've heard a lot of good things about C60.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There are tons of positive testimonials out there. But Pantalleresco thinks we need to be careful about taking those at face value.
What do you mean?
Well, he points out that the health and wellness industry is a huge business. There's a lot of money to be made, and sometimes that means cutting corners or even flat out lying about a product's effectiveness.
So he's suggesting some of those C60 testimonials might be fake.
He doesn't say that outright, but he definitely wants us to be more critical of what we read and hear, especially when it comes to our health.
That's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the hype. So if we're potentially surrounded by nanotechnology and being bombarded with this blue light, is there anything we can do to protect ourselves?
Pantalleresco does have some advice, and that's what we'll get into after the break. So we're back and diving deeper into this whole nanotechnology thing. What really stuck with you from the first part of our deep dive?
Honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the idea that nanotech is already everywhere. Like, it's not some sci-fi future thing. It's already in our food, the air, even inside of us. That's kind of freaky, right?
It's kind of freaky, yeah. And Pantalleresco doesn't exactly paint a rosy picture of what all that nanotech could be doing to us. He seems pretty convinced it's a health risk, especially since it hasn't been properly tested. It's like we're all part of this giant experiment without even knowing it.
Right, and like we were talking about before, he makes that comparison to a glass overflowing with water. Too much nanotech in our bodies and boom problems.
Yeah, a disturbing thought. And then there's the Blue Beam Project, which adds a whole other layer of weirdness to this. I mean, the idea that blue light could actually activate nanotech in our brains, that's mind-blowing.
Yeah, that one really got me thinking. Are we talking about actual mind control here? Like, could someone use this technology to manipulate us?
That's definitely the implication. And it gets into some deep questions about free will and all that. It's like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. But Pantalleresco seems to think it's already happening in some form.
And what's even creepier is that he links it to everyday things like LED lights and screens. It makes you look at your smartphone in a whole new light, doesn't it?
It totally does. I mean, we're surrounded by blue light all the time.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what kind of impact it's having on us.
Makes you wonder if we should be more careful about the technology we use and how much we use it.
Exactly. Pantalleresco really emphasizes that point, being more mindful of the tech in our lives.
Yeah.
And then there's the food thing. He's a big advocate for growing your own food and even raising chickens indoors.
Yeah, that part was interesting. Is he saying our food is intentionally being contaminated with nanotech?
I don't think he explicitly says that,
Right.
but he definitely doesn't trust the current food system. He thinks we're basically at the mercy of whatever's put into our food, and he wants us to take back some control.
So what's the solution? Should we all become farmers and live off the grid?
He doesn't say we all have to go that extreme, but he's all about taking small steps to protect ourselves, like choosing organic food, buying local, or at least paying attention to food labels.
It's about making conscious choices, not just going along with whatever is easiest or cheapest.
Exactly. And that ties into his whole thing about frequency defense.
Right, right. He told us to look into optogenetics. That's the science where they use light to control cells, and he's worried about it.
Can you remind me what frequency defense is all about? Is it like wearing a tinfoil hat to block out bad vibes?
Well, not exactly. It's more about understanding how certain frequencies, like electromagnetic fields, might be affecting our health, and then finding ways to protect ourselves from the harmful ones, like maybe using special shielding materials or being more aware of how much time we spend around electronic devices.
He even mentioned protecting the power grid from some kind of attack. It sounds pretty intense.
It does, but I think his main point is that we need to be proactive, do our own research, figure out what works, and take steps to protect ourselves.
So it's about empowering ourselves with knowledge, not just living in fear.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to technology. We can't just blindly trust that everything's safe and good for us.
Right. And speaking of trust, we were talking about those C60 testimonials earlier. Pantalleresco made a good point about not taking testimonials at face value.
Yeah, he's skeptical of that whole testimonial culture, especially in the health and wellness industry.
I mean, they can be persuasive, right? You see all these people raving about a product, and it's easy to get sucked in.
Totally. But Pantalleresco reminds us that testimonials are just personal stories. They might be true, but they're not scientific evidence.
So just because your friend's aunt's neighbor swears by something doesn't mean it actually works.
Right. And even if it did work for them, it might not work for you. We all react differently to things.
So what's the takeaway here?
I think it's about being critical thinkers. Don't just blindly believe everything you read or hear. Do your own research, look for evidence, and make informed decisions.
Be a savvy consumer both of products and information. That seems to be Panthaloresco's big message. It's all about taking responsibility for our own health and well-being in this crazy tech-filled world.
Absolutely. And I think that's a message we can all benefit from, whether we buy into all his ideas about nanotech or not.
Well said. We've covered a ton of ground here. Maybe we should take a breath and try to process all this before we wrap things up. Okay, so back to Pantaloresco and all this nanotech stuff. It's a lot to take in, that's for sure. But beyond all the technical details and scary scenarios, there's a bigger message here, right? It's
Yeah.
about taking control, being informed, not just letting technology sweep us along.
Definitely. I think that's the core of what Pantaloresco is trying to do. He's not just throwing out warnings, he's giving us tools, urging us to become more aware, do our own research. He wants us to be active participants, not passive consumers.
Yeah, he paints a pretty stark picture, though. I mean, this idea that nanotech is everywhere, even inside us, and we don't even fully understand the risks. It's kind of overwhelming.
Right, and he's not sugarcoating it, like with that analogy of the overflowing glass. It's a simple image, but it really gets the point across. Too much of anything, even something tiny like nanotech, can throw things out of whack.
It makes you think twice about all the new tech we embrace, without a second thought. It's like, are we really in control, or are we just being swept along by this wave of innovation?
It's a good question, and I think Pantaloresco would say we need to be asking that question more often, challenging assumptions, looking beyond the shiny surface.
It's not about rejecting technology altogether, though, right? It's about understanding it, using it wisely.
Exactly, and that's where the knowledge comes in. Like he says, knowledge is power. The more we understand about how these technologies work, the better choices we can make.
And it's not just about knowing the science. It's about critical thinking in general. Being able to sift through information, figure out what's reliable, what's hype, and what's just plain BS.
Absolutely. That's a skill we need now more than ever, with so much information flying around, especially online.
Pantaloresco even touches on the spiritual side of all this, which I found really interesting. I mean, describing Christ's sacrifice as a kind of antivirus program for humanity, that's a pretty unique take.
It is. It makes you think about the deeper implications of technology, how it affects not just our bodies and minds, but maybe even our souls.
It's a lot to process, that's for sure. But I think the key takeaway is that we have a choice. We can be swept along by this kind of technology, or we can become informed, empowered, and take control of our own destinies.
Well said. It's not about fear, it's about awareness, knowledge, and action.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap things up. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of nanotechnology and the Blue Beam Project. It's been a wild ride.
Yeah, it has. And who knows, maybe it's just the beginning.
Stay curious out there, folks. And always remember, knowledge is power.